Welcome back now for the news in detail. Chinese President Xi Jinping says he is watching the situation in Kashmir and supports Pakistan's core interests. He was meeting Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan in Beijing. Both leaders discussed the entire spectrum of bilateral relations, the regional situation and matters of mutual interest. Earlier meeting Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, Prime Minister Khan said, "The world must act to help the people of Indian Occupied Kashmir." The Chinese Foreign Ministry says Beijing hopes India and Pakistan will hold dialogue on the Kashmir dispute. Premier Li assured Khan of his country's support on all regional issues. The two leaders also agreed that the second phase of the bilateral free trade agreement will create more trade opportunities. Now for more on this, our Beijing correspondent Patrick Falk joined us now. Patrick, what can you tell us about Prime Minister Khan's meeting with President Xi Jinping?
Well, as you mentioned, we are told that the two sides talked about bilateral relations, regional issues, as well as matters of mutual interest. Prime Minister Khan congratulated President Xi on the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic and also talked about some of the difficult economic times that Pakistan had been through and thanked China for its financial support. He also made a point of highlighting that China's friendship and support had been without condition. Of course, there was, as we understand, a focus on security issues, although we don't have an awful lot of details about what was discussed exactly. There were previous reports that said that Pakistan's army chief may have attended the meeting as well, which suggests that there was a particular focus on this. The other thing, of course, is that much has been made about why China chose to say so late on or reveal so late on details of President Xi's visit to India. Whether or not that has anything to do with Prime Minister Khan's visit, we're not entirely clear. But Foreign Minister Qureshi had previously said that the idea of this visit was to take each other into confidence ahead of President Xi's visit to India. The Chinese side will keep Pakistan informed of any relevant matters that come up during that visit.
Now, Patrick, interestingly, China and Pakistan both have a big stake in what is currently happening in Indian Occupied Kashmir. So how has this figured in the Chinese officials' comments during Khan's visit?
Well, I think you touched on it just a moment ago. Yesterday, Premier Li said that China supported Pakistan's rights to legitimately defend its national sovereignty and territorial integrity, although you have to understand that perhaps before President Xi's visit to China, they may not want to talk too much about what China's position is exactly, particularly if it is forceful on the matter. At the same time, we are hearing from Indian reports that they don't necessarily intend for this topic of discussion to be raised during President Xi's visit, although they said that they would help the Chinese side to understand their position if it is indeed tabled between President Modi and Prime Minister Modi and President Xi when they do meet each other.
Right. Thank you, Patrick Falk, for your latest updates from China now. Moving on, all main political parties in Indian Occupied Kashmir have boycotted the first ever local body election scheduled for October 24th. India's top opposition party, Congress, has also reversed its decision after pledging to participate in the polls last week. Party spokesperson Ravinder Sharma says the decision was taken in the wake of thousands of Kashmiri politicians arrested by New Delhi. Sharma expressed strong reservations over the political and security environment in the occupied valley. The NC, PDP and CPIM had already expressed reservations over participating in BTC polls. We're joined now from Mumbai by our correspondent Rebecca Bandhan. Now, Rebecca, it has been widely reported the Indian National Congress will not take part in the Jammu BDC elections on October 24th. So, Rebecca, could mean the BJP and independent candidates would contest them. And how much credibility will these elections now have?
Well, firstly, these Block Development Council elections in Kashmir are highly significant, given the fact that they are the first polls that are taking place following the Indian government's decision to revoke Kashmir's special status, which, of course, took away significant autonomy. Following that, there's been a near blackout on communications. There have been protests and so on. There's been a lot of controversy around that decision. So these polls that are coming up later this month on the 24th are highly significant. Now, it seems to have taken some people by surprise that the Congress has now, it seems, decided to reverse its decision to take part in these polls, given the fact that just a few days ago, just recently, Congress had said that it wanted to participate because of the fact that it wanted to strengthen democracy, and it didn't want the elections, the polls, to be a walkover for the BJP, which is the ruling party in India, of course. But now it seems to have gone back on that. It seems to be saying that it hasn't really had the interest in participation in Kashmir. People are not coming forward, and that there are, of course, a number of leaders that are still detained. So that's one of the major issues there, and that seems to be a factor behind its decision. But the BJP party just a couple of days ago was saying that it expects to secure a kind of a 90% majority. Now, I mean, something like that is looking increasingly likely as we've seen these parties backing out. It seems that it doesn't really have much competition.
Rebecca, also tell us, as we know, senior Congress leaders from Jammu met with their Kashmir colleagues, including former Chief Minister Farooq Abdullah last week. So how much of an issue has the detention of mainstream Kashmiri politicians become in India's national politics?
It absolutely has become an issue, and it's been criticised by the Congress. It's been criticised by other parties as well, including the DMK in Tamil Nadu. These leaders were arrested under the Public Safety Act. That in itself is quite controversial because it's a law that allows detention of people for up to 2 years without trial. So that's been a major issue here, and a source of a lot of concern among not only other opposition political parties, but also the population, the public. It's something that's been criticised quite widely in the international media as well, especially as we're approaching these polls and so on. We can see how something like this is now having an impact and how it could have an effect on democracy. The Indian government, of course, says it has its own reasons for taking such measures, such as trying to maintain security in the region, but it's definitely become a major issue here and quite a big talking point.
Right, Rebecca Bandhan, thank you very much for your updates. Now, moving on, Iran has accepted Pakistan and Iraq's offer to mediate a possible solution to disputes between Tehran and Riyadh. Responding to the mediation offers, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said Iran is ready to talk with Saudi Arabia on all issues. Zarif said that Iran has always been ready to cooperate with its neighbors for regional security. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan met Saudi Arabia's Mohammed bin Salman and Iran's President Hassan Rouhani at the UNGA summit. During their meeting, Khan was asked by the Crown Prince Salman to mediate between Saudi Arabia and Iran. The United Nations says 39 civilians were killed in the US airstrikes on several drug-making facilities in western Afghanistan in May. The Pentagon had claimed there were no civilian casualties. The UN's Afghanistan Assistance Mission report says the victims were mostly women and children. UNAMA said the air raids were a violation of international law as they did not meet the definition of legitimate military objectives. The US forces have rejected the findings, insisting its precision strikes had accurately targeted meth labs. They said the strikes did not cause deaths or injuries to non-combatants. Moving on, Turkey says its forces will cross the Syrian border sometime today. President Tayyip Erdogan's communications director, Fahrettin Altun, says the Free Syrian Army will join the operation. Altun says the US withdrawal of troops made way for the Turkish incursion. He told the Kurdish militants in Syria to either defect or face Ankara's troops. He says the military struck the Syrian-Iraqi border to prevent Kurdish forces using the route to reinforce the region. In the meantime, the Kurdish-led SDF said 3 ISIS suicide bombers attacked its military positions in northeast Raqqa. US President Donald Trump said any unnecessary fighting by Turkey will have devastating consequences for its economy. Meanwhile, the European Union has expressed its concerns that Turkey's military operation in northeast Syria could push a new wave of refugees towards Europe. The bloc's interior ministers meeting in Luxembourg says the Turkey-Greece route will become the main migration path. Luxembourg's Foreign Minister Jean Asselborn says Syrian refugees in Turkey may decide to head for Europe to avoid returning to Syria. Greece says the refugee movement into the country has increased by 240% in the last 6 months. Bulgaria, Cyprus and Greece issued a joint statement at the event underlining the situation in the eastern Mediterranean. Meanwhile, Turkey says its preparations for the incursion is complete and has deployed armored vehicles to the border. It's time for a short break. Stay tuned with Indus News. Welcome back now. 5 European members of the UN Security Council have urged North Korea to take steps towards giving up its nuclear weapons. The Europeans have also demanded North Korea and its ballistic missile program. But right now, we'll take you live to China, where Prime Minister Khan is attending a horticulture event.
These are images that you're watching.
Well, moving on with the news stories now, we'll take you back as soon as we get live images again now. UN Security Council resolutions bar Pyongyang from its ballistic missile technology. The European members say the recent launches are undermining regional security. Now moving on, Russia says it is deeply concerned over North Korea's threat to end nuclear negotiations with the US. Russia's envoy in Vienna, Mikhail Ulyanov, said it has become clear negotiations between the two countries are in a bad condition. He said a more creative approach is needed to ensure Pyongyang steps in the right direction. The US and North Korea held a preliminary meeting in Stockholm on 5th of October. Pyongyang declared the dialogue a failure, while Washington says it laid a good foundation for future meetings. Russia says a ministerial meeting to be held in the Normandy format is being discussed and could happen soon. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Vershinin says the Steinmeier formula became an important step towards resolving problems with Ukraine. Kiev has agreed to the Steinmeier formula, which gives the Donbass region special status and allows it to hold its own elections. Vershinin says Ukraine still needs to satisfy other commitments in the Minsk agreements. Kiev is accusing Russia of stalling the Normandy talks by adding more conditions even after the Steinmeier formula agreement. Meanwhile, in the United States, the White House has refused to cooperate with the impeachment inquiry against President Donald Trump. In a letter to Congress, White House counsel Pat Cipollone called the investigation illegal and constitutionally invalid. The letter said the inquiry lacks any legitimate constitutional foundation, pretense of fairness and due process protections. The letter implies that no additional witnesses under administration purview will be permitted to appear in front of Congress. President Trump is facing a congressional inquiry for seeking Ukraine's help to probe former Vice President Joe Biden. The European Parliament's President David Sassoli says there has been no progress in Brexit talks. After meeting British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, he said there are options for an extension or an exit deal without a deal. Sassoli and Johnson discussed preserving an open border between the Irish Republic and Northern Ireland after Brexit. He said the European Parliament will not agree to a deal that undermines the Good Friday announcement. He said the integrity of the single market will not be compromised. Prime Minister Johnson said he will not ask the EU to extend the date of Brexit beyond October 31st. Meanwhile, the minister planning Britain's no-deal exit from the European Union says the country still wants to leave the bloc with an agreement. Michael Gove says the European Union must change its position to reach a deal. Gove admits the challenges for some businesses cannot be avoided. He told Parliament the government has a strong desire to leave the European Union with a deal. He said UK proposals to replace the Irish border backstop were published last week. He added the UK put forward a fair compromise for all sides that respect the Brexit referendum results.
We hope that the EU will engage with us seriously. And in setting out these proposals, we've moved. It is now time for the EU to move too. If it does, then there is still every chance that we can leave with a new deal. However, if the EU does not move, this government is prepared to leave without a deal on the 31st.
Well, the future of Brexit remains uncertain because both London and Brussels are positioning themselves to avoid blame for a delay or a no-deal Brexit. Now, moving on to Germany, which has warned of a repeat of the chaotic movement of migrants that caught the European Union unprepared in 2015. Greece and Cyprus also voiced concern over a surge in arrivals from neighboring Turkey. German Interior Minister Horst Seehofer says the lack of a common European asylum policy can lead to uncontrolled immigration. He was speaking ahead of an EU ministers' meeting on migration. Greece has again become the main gateway to Europe for people fleeing wars and poverty in the Middle East, Asia and Africa. United Nations data shows over 45,000 arrivals by the sea this year. Italy and Malta are trying to enroll more EU members in a migrant relocation scheme. The scheme was agreed with France and Germany last month for people rescued at sea. Now in France, farmers around the country are blocking highways with their tractors in protest at the government's agricultural policies. The farmers are calling for just trade policies and have denounced the government's treatment of the agricultural sector. More in this report.
French farmers have been concerned ever since the country's parliament approved an EU-Canada trade deal in July. A road blockade is the first in a series of demonstrations planned by two French farmers' unions.
It is important that the consumer takes action, meaning he must be coherent with what he wants, what he purchases, and this is very important.
Farmers have been angered by another trade deal signed between the EU and the Mercosur bloc. Under the deal, they say France has agreed to food imports that will put them into poverty. The French Transport and Environment Minister has sided with farmers.
I cannot endorse agri-bashing. I think farmers must be respected, for their job is difficult, and we must accompany them in adopting practices that are more environmental friendly.
The French Yellow Vest protests have only recently lost steam after they began in October last year. But with the farmers' protest movement just starting, it seems French President Emmanuel Macron's government still has a long way to go to calm its critics and solve the unrest.
The loggerhead turtle population has been declared vulnerable by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Tourism, climate change and good fortune all weigh on the future of the loggerheads in the Atlantic, Pacific and Indian Oceans. However, Archelon volunteers at a Greek beach are trying to conserve the ocean-going reptiles. More in this report.
The Athens-based Archelon Turtle Protection Organization says this year the coastline at Kyparissia had 3,700 nests compared to 3,500 from last year. Climate change has also produced the potential to change the turtles' gender balance. Another key nesting ground at Laganas Bay attracts hundreds of thousands of tourists annually.
From 1994 until now, we have treated over 1,100 injured sea turtles. We are happy to say that over 56% have been freed and returned to their natural environment.
More than 600 turtles turn up dead in Greece every year, mostly on beaches, but also in the water, sick or trapped in nets. The turtles ingest fishhooks and plastic debris, but more than half of their injuries are caused by humans.
Probably a boat injured her. You can see here and here the scars from that boat strike. And unfortunately, that injury caused her, let's say, like muscular atrophy.
Plans to expand energy prospecting in the Ionian Sea and near Crete have sparked anger. Archelon plans to continue its work to save and preserve the loggerhead and other turtles.
Now in business stories, the International Monetary Fund's new managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, has issued a warning on global growth. Georgieva says the trade conflicts have thrown the global economy into a synchronized slowdown and they must be resolved. IMF chief says the world economy is set to see its lowest growth in nearly a decade. In her first speech as IMF managing director, Georgieva said, grinding trade disputes are undermining the global economy.
In 2019, we expect today even more of the world economy is moving in sync. But unfortunately, this time growth is decelerating. To be precise, in 2019, we expect slower growth in nearly 90% of the world.
European stock markets have opened positive despite increasing pessimism about trade talks between the US and China. Investors have been spooked by the US imposition of visa restrictions on some Chinese officials and the banning of leading Chinese tech corporations. Washington took these measures ahead of the resumption of high-level trade negotiations with China tomorrow. Reversing yesterday's losses, the CAC 40 in Paris and Frankfurt DAX index have gained 0.5%. London's FTSE 100 is trading flat. Earlier, most Asian stock markets tracked overnight losses on Wall Street. The Nikkei 225 index in Tokyo and Hong Kong's Hangs have shed more than 0.5%, but the Shanghai Composite bucked the trend to gain about 0.5%. Concerns about global growth have driven oil prices down for a third consecutive day. Now let's have a look at the weather updates. Well, that's all for now. For more news and updates, stay tuned with Indus News.